Thank you for joining us live with Miami's Community News, and our guest is Javier Baños, attorney, CPA, and activist in Coral Gables.
Thank you very much, Michael.
And
How
it's
are
nice
you?
to see you. And happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too.
And happy holidays coming up. I hope you
Excellent.
and your family enjoy each other, because as we realize, we just don't know what's going to be around tomorrow.
Correct.
And it's certainly a time to be joyous for most of us
Right.
on our lives. So let's talk about what you've been doing and what does the future look like.
Well, I've been keeping busy. I still have my CPA firm and my law firm with my spouse, and the future looks very bright for South Florida, especially the real estate market, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. At least for today, because one of the things that my office is a real estate firm, but also the accounting firm also handles a great deal of tax work. And one of the things that I believe most of your listeners would actually welcome as an interesting aspect of what they can do now that everyone is thinking about selling their homes or selling their investment property is exploring the possibility of doing what is called a 1031 exchange through the Internal Revenue Service. And what it is a very simple process in which you don't touch the money. Okay, all we're doing is an exchange between the property, and this has to be investment properties. It won't happen in your home, okay, but it certainly happen if you have a rental property, or if you live somewhere else and that you're renting your home and your home becomes an investment property. And then in that sense, you have a rental income coming from your house, or from apartments you may have, or a building or something else. You can take, if you decide to sell that property right now, okay, and you will sell it regularly, you would pay maximum rate 15 to 20% on the gain that comes out of that. So if you have $1 million transaction, and all of a sudden you have $500,000 in gain, you will pay 15 to 20% of the $500,000 to the Internal Revenue Service. A good trick of doing that, and you can do this repeatedly, okay, is to essentially exchange into buying a new property. Because most people, when they do that, when they do an investment property, they're not holding the money for themselves. They want to put that money to work. They want to put it into something else. And real estate typically is that something else. And this is a way in which you can go ahead and save the money and put it into something else.
So if somebody sells a piece of property, $10 million, they might typically pay $1.5 to $2 million in taxes.
Right.
And then with IRS, it would be over after you give that to them.
Right.
But with this, you get to keep that money by virtue that you're buying something else.
Essentially, what you're doing is you're deferring that gain, that tax hit. You're just putting it into the future, and the IRS understands that because you're just reinvesting this money. Okay, they understand that all is happening is you're just putting it away into the future, so that they're not going to tax on it right now. Now, there are very particular rules on how to do it, and it's important that we're talking to each other today on November 18th, because it's a key date in all 1031 exchanges, because they say you sell the property today. Okay, and you sell the property that's an investment property today. You have 45 days, okay, to pick a different property, okay, and then you close within 6 months, and you manage to do that, okay, and if you do it in that fashion, you pay no income tax and no capital gains
versus the 15 or 20%.
Versus the first interest in that transaction. Essentially, it's a huge tax windfall. Let's say, for example, that you decide not to do it, okay. You decide that you want to do 1031, but you cannot find the house, you cannot find the replacement property. You do that today, okay? And you essentially are deferring that gain to next year, okay? Because you have 45 days from the end of the tax year, okay? And then you would essentially have to pay the tax when the tax is due, but not next year, for the following year in 2021, 2022 tax year. And you're deferring that, having to pay that tax by an entire year.
So people that use the 1031, they can keep deferring it, and they do it for business or for their family. Say you're going to pay the tax down the road.
In the road, I can give you a funny example, which I always like to give this. So there's this veteran, because we were talking about one of your guys here who is a reservist. There's a veteran who used to have a small apartment, okay, where he used to live in Virginia Beach, in North Fork in Virginia. And what he did was, once he moved out of there, okay, he rented an apartment for a while, and then he took that money. That this happened in the 90s, right? He took that apartment, and he sold it, did a 1031 exchange, put it into a duplex in North Carolina. Okay. He rented out the duplexes in North Carolina. He wasn't living there, it was in his home. This happened in the beginning of the year 2000. Then he took some of the money, bought another property here in Florida, and lived in that property for a few years. Then moved to Arizona. Okay, rented the property here in Florida. Took those two properties, the North Carolina property and the Florida property, did a 1031, combining both properties into a 1031. Took that gain, bought a building in Arizona where he was living, and then he eventually moved to Las Vegas. Okay, and that building he utilized it, did another 1031 exchange, and now he's living in a $5 million home. Okay, after doing all this exchange, and this is just a regular guy who was in the army. Okay, he just managed to defer this gain forward and forward and forward, and eventually, obviously, you do have to pay for it. But one key difference and one key thing that folks don't think about is if you have zero income. Okay, and people who are retirees can have, not zero but very, very low income. Okay, and as you age, then that gain can be taxed at zero. Right? So you may be deferring the gain, but it could be that you get to your advanced age, and when you are putting it at that point in time, then you actually get no tax at all.
And if the market was bad for a couple of years, that 10 to 15%, if you will, may be tiny if you wound up selling it.
Right. So and or if the market is very so this is the key moment in which to actually engage in this transaction. So what and the people typically ask, okay, fine, I have an investment property, I have a second home, I have a second apartment, I have my kids' college apartment in Gainesville that they're no longer using because of the pandemic. They're all doing everything online. I want to sell it. What do I do? It's very simple. Okay. So first of all, you need to contact your realtor and contact your attorney. Okay. And typically the closing agent, which I act as a closing agent, our firm, Law Services PA, does, will refer you to what is called a 1031 exchange company. Okay. And there are a few, we use typically in our office, we use All Republic Exchange. And what they'll do is you can't touch the money. That's the only key part of this. Okay. You cannot touch the money. So whenever it is you go to closing, okay, when you finalize the closing, they would actually take all the money from you, okay, and they're going to hold it in trust for you in a separate account. And what will happen is that money then stays there until you find your replacement property. You have very tight deadline of 45 days. So you have to start looking even before you sell.
So do people at that point, are they looking for something that could be a similar value, just in a different area?
In different area.
It could be less or more.
So to give you, I've done 4 1031 exchanges just this year. Okay. And all we've done is we had some investment properties and we bought larger investment properties with the same idea. And we have paid zero taxes
on your profit, on your theoretical profit.
On my profits on each one of those transactions. Okay. And remember, the key also part of this is that folks need to understand is it has to be what is called like kind, right? So what does that mean? You can go from buying an apartment to buying a house. You can buy a house to buy a building. Okay, you can. It all has to be real estate, but you could also buy futures in a contract. Okay, you can buy so long as it's a real estate contract.
And if those are in LLC or corporation, same thing applies.
Same thing applies. Okay,
so excuse me, I got to do a commercial. Sorry for
sure.
OG Paint, Peggy Sue over there on Bird Road. Thank you very much for supporting the program, and we enjoy getting our paint from you. Oh, look, you can reach them there. 305-666-3300. Thank you so much.
Very good place, by the way.
Around family business,
and we used them for in some of our homes. So thank you very much.
I met the grandmother,
yes,
the mother, and the sons. Right, and as you know, going to that third generation is pretty tough.
Yeah.
So in these cases, when you do the 1031 exchange, that could wind up when you die. How does that play out?
Well, this is just a deferment of your overall gain. But whenever it is you end up with a property at the very end, if you have that property, typically that property will appreciate to fair value, okay, at the time of death if you're still holding it in your name. If it's held by a corporation, clearly they're not affected by the death of the shareholders. Same thing with an LLC. It could be in a partnership depending on the nature of the partnership. But typically they will appraise to fair value. So once your estate sells it or your family member sell it, there probably will be also zero gain in that transaction, which is why one of the key ways of accumulating wealth in this country is through real estate transactions. Okay, and this is a very simple way for everyday common people to preserve their family wealth and to be able to augment, especially for retirement, because this is a if you are somebody who has two, three, four properties, those three, four properties will accumulate in value over your lifetime, and then you are a retiree receiving income from these small properties. So it's a very worthwhile investment and a very and it's an excellent way for you to not only keep your wealth and not having to pay it to the government, but also preserve and be able to build up upon that. So you can go from an apartment to a house to a house to a building.
So Javier, so in your experience, do people when they're getting ready to do a 1031, do they already have another property in mind?
They have to. So you only have, they're very tight deadlines. You only have 45 days to designate the replacement property. Typically, depending, there's a couple of rules that are kind of like a little technical. But typically you pick three properties. Okay, the basic prospect of it, and then you just select those three properties. You just have to select them. Okay, it doesn't require anything else. You don't have to have a contract. It doesn't have to. You have to go through those. You just have to point them out.
So if there's property owned by partners and it's sold, can they split that and they each do a 1031?
You asked the one exit that the IRS is an issue with. Okay, so partnership interests, okay, cannot be subjected to 1031. Okay, so in other words, just your partnership interest, that's just the asset. But if the partnership has real estate assets, okay, then yes, you can go ahead and sell a portion of that in a 1031. And for example, let's say that you have three partners, okay, and you yourself are the only one who wants to do a 1031. That's fine. Okay, we can do a 1031 for only half of the sale, and then you're going to want to be paying gain on the one half. You can do it for a third. You can do it for 10%. Okay?
So if somebody buys the exchange property is 20% less than the original, a buyer would have to pay the tax on the 20%
on the addition. Okay, so it's just you're only paying, then you're deferring the income on the difference.
So and the reason these laws are there is why.
Well, long time ago, this is sort of there was an understanding that because you're using this for reinvestment purposes, you're taking the money from A to invest it in B. Okay, it seemed for the government, the government wanted to encourage that type of transaction. Okay, and government didn't want people to be penalized every single time they were going to reinvest their gains on a sale, for that to be to not go forward, because people were afraid of the taxable gain. Remember, we have now a preferred tax rate, but those rates in the 70s and early 80s, when a lot of these laws were put into place, were very, very punitive. Okay, so we're looking at a much lower rates, but people nonetheless do want to take advantage of this institution. So it was a way of promoting business and a way of promoting the development of real estate.
And if the seller sells it on is holding a mortgage, how does that work?
Well, typically, I mean, that's the common part. So we just have to, for example, let's say that you're holding a mortgage, and the net value that you're receiving, what you're getting out of it, okay, it's only about 50%, because the other 50% is going out in the mortgage. Well, you can still do, you're deferring the gain on the entire balance. Okay, that's there. The mortgage is sort of irrelevant. So you just have to make sure that when you're applying these new properties, if you want a full, complete, avoidance of the tax, or deferment of the tax, I should say, then that you buy property that is of the same or equal or greater value, so that if you do a sale for $200,000, then you're buying a $500,000 property. Then clearly all the gain is going to go into the.
And how long has the 1031 rule been around?
It's been around for 30 years, 40 years.
So it's a pretty simple thing.
It is,
which is you have this, you're going to sell it, you can make a profit. They have an arrangement where you can take the money and buy another piece of property.
Correct.
Very similar, if I got it right, with Save Your Home Homestead,
and look, the other thing people should know is if you have your own home, okay, there's still a tax benefit, okay, on your personal property. The first if you're married, $500,000 of the gain is completely exempt from taxes. You have to meet some rules as to how long you lived in the property, how long you've owned it, and then you get a percentage of that. But primarily, if you're single, $250,000 is exempt. If you're married, $500,000 is exempt from the sale of your own personal residence. So that is a different rule. It's not a deferment rule. It's just an exemption rule. But the other thing that people in South Florida should know about, because we do have hurricanes that come into place commonly, is that if you have distressed property that has been affected by a hurricane, property that has been condemned or whatever, you can do the same thing when it's called a 1033 exchange, okay? And in that instance, you actually defer the gain by 3 years rather than just 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But that will be, we'll have that conversation the next hurricane that comes about.
So I was listening to one of the radio stations talking about, and they were doing some surveys, and they talk about the general state of the economy. It's strong, right?
It is.
The stock market is strong. Obviously, real estate prices are strong. I mean, it's everybody that sells it. You have the real estate attorneys, you have the mortgage brokers, you got the guy that does the yard, you got the new stuff. But yet, and jobs are paying more. But yet, a majority of Americans think the economy is bad.
Well,
and during COVID, according to the survey, people were happier with the economy. So it's interesting to see how our psyche is being affected by all this.
Well, people probably should look. It's not the same for everybody, right? So what we're talking about mostly deals with investors. Okay, a lot of folks don't have investors, and then once property values go up the way they have, a significant portion of the population that are lower income don't have as much, or they're just entering into the real estate market. New college graduates, new families, etc. Find that now they have all these barriers to entry into the market because the prices are just out of control. So there's a basis for folks to feel the degree of discontent, but I mean this is a cyclical process that always.
We knew when we were much younger. You look at the house. Oh my God! How can I afford it? $78,000. Oh my goodness! Well, we all figure out a way to handle that. And we know across the county there was some pent up demand for housing, and the county's really trying to address that issue as far as affordable housing. And they're going to each of the cities and say, listen, let's figure out how to handle all the people that want to live. Particularly here in South Florida.
The city of Miami is talking about micro units in some of their zoning board discussions, and you're essentially talking about co-living, okay, in a dormitory, Golden Girls type situation, right, where you're really having a small portion of an entire building. And then you come into questions to whether or not we have the infrastructure for all that, and everything comes into play.
So when we look at our lifestyle here, you have a front yard, a backyard, a side yard. You drive to your house, you have air conditioning, maybe you have a pool, and if we look at New York City living, it is different.
Right.
You probably don't have a car. You're living in a building, got the elevator, and it's all crazy. So down here, we've escaped that type of living, right, for a long time. But if you go downtown here, downtown Miami,
that's not what's going on.
Right. You see this whole different type of living. My son lives in one of the buildings downtown. He happens to be a nice sized apartment. But you begin to realize, okay, you might not have to have a car, right? If you're lucky, you're working downtown. Mm-hmm.
Or you're working from your computer.
Yes.
Right? Which is, look, we've talked about this. The silver linings of COVID, right? The thing that has allowed us to is that now you really have a situation, which is why you've seen such a widespread, the effect on real estate all throughout South Florida, all throughout the nation, really, is that people are moving out of this concentrated cities because we found out that we can essentially work from anywhere, okay? And their hottest markets, the Charlottes, mid-sized cities, Miami, okay, you have Vegas, you have areas in which you typically didn't have that much people living in them, and now folks are moving into them because they found the real estate to be relatively cheaper than what it used to be, and they still found the place more attractive for essentially, and they're able to do the same work long distance.
And when we go along that line, when I look at it, homes that I've owned over the years, they've built for entertainment.
Right.
So the new apartments, they're not built for entertainment.
Right.
They're built for, you go there and you sleep there and you may have some other stuff,
right.
and then you entertain outside. And if
right.
you will, when you see these old, yes, sir, what am I looking at? Oh, Max says hello. You know Max? How long will apartment rental prices remain high?
I can answer that question. Look, it's a supply problem, right? So like everything else, the main issue you're going to have is if you have a lot of people looking for the same degree of resources. So you're going to have more units go up. You're going to have people who are essentially going to be priced out of those markets. So once you replace the inventory, then probably or you have more of these properties not being sold and resold into personal homes, you're probably going to have the prices taper off. I'm not sure they're going to go down. It's just a question of how high they're going to go.
And then there are plenty of conversations ongoing about building more higher apartments, smaller, right. No cars needed along US 1, mm-hmm. and with the transportation going back and forth. I don't know how that's going to work because I'm in a different era,
right.
But apparently that's a plan, right? And the county's trying to, help the cities make the decision to have more apartments, right?
I live in the city of Coral Gables, and it is a staple of our mode of living to essentially keep the traditional Gables lifestyle. That is a larger home in a fairly larger lot. But other places like downtown, where all this growth is, and you have a fairly old picture here compared to what it is today, all these that you're going to have a concentration of living in the downtown area that is going to be a different style. You're going to have units that are smaller. You're going to have units, and folks are going to live without. Essentially, it's going to be a more cosmopolitan urban lifestyle than it will be down to the west.
So I was talking to some folks about electric cars. I said, I like going to the gas station in 5 minutes, I'm out. But they said, listen, there'll be a whole generation that they're only going to have electric cars.
Of course.
And they will be used to whatever the fueling that's going to take place, right? Whatever that happens to be. And certainly with telephones, it certainly made it a whole lot easier to wait in a line because you keep yourself entertained.
Right.
And so beginning to see that more and more often.
Look, technology modifies everything. I mean, they're going to make I have a classic car that I like to drive, which is an old town car, and they're probably going to make it a relic, or they're going to put me in prison because I'm polluting the world, right? So it's just the next generations are going to have cars that are not going to use gasoline. Okay, we're going to take it. Thankfully for climate change, it's going to be a welcome change, at least in the United States, and our children, we were asking about what's going to happen to our children's generation. Our children are going to live in a more urban environment, okay, especially if they decide to live here in South Florida. It's going to be a different landscape than the one we're accustomed to. And change is just part of humanity. But the nice thing about it is that will be what they know, right? Yes. And so they'll be your mode of understanding of what a house is very different than perhaps your grandparents. You don't have 5 acres? What do you mean? Okay, you don't have 10 acres? And so it's a 7,800 square foot home, 7,500 square lot with a 2,000 square foot home will be the lap of luxury in probably the next 50 years. It's just population grows exponentially, and this is the price we pay for it.
Yeah. So I have a friend. He lives in one of the big buildings with valet parking, and he says when he pulls up his car, if it needs battery, the valet takes it and parks it. Yeah, and puts it.
And they use the elevator to put the cars up, and they have a car elevator in the garages, and they'll just they garage the vehicles, and they have a charging station right next to it. So most of these high towers now, that's the way they actually handle it. And we some of it creates tensions because you're going to have to wait longer for your car, but then people may not need to have cars to begin with.
So, put aside all the tragedy that's happened because of COVID. What are some of the good things that have happened?
I think from my perspective, it has given a better value of family. I think it brought a lot of people together because now you have these concentrated bubbles, and you had to dedicate times to them. So in my life, that has been a welcome benefit. It has given us a we have improved our homes incredibly because the folks are now hanging around their homes, and we have created a better living space for all of us. And then lastly, it has changed the way we work. So people are using cars less. That we're having to travel less to different places because now we can work remotely, and that's become a different way of working, but it also has expanded the possibilities. So I think it's a welcome change.
Yeah, and we see the acceleration of technology in the last 2 years. It seems like it's maybe a 10-year episode that went on. Prior to the pandemic, there was a company called Zoom. I thought there was make your teeth white. Well, they went from 10 million to 500 million.
Right.
Essentially overnight.
Overnight.
And we had a business meeting the other day. She said, "No, you're not coming over." There were 4 of us. And we had the conversation,
right?
And we were right in here. We saw that, and it was like phenomenal. I go, "This is wonderful."
It is, and I mean, most of the hearings that I conduct in court today are all done online. So the trip to Broward County that would take an hour and a half, going over and coming back, waiting in the courtroom, all those things, none of that is happening.
So one of the things, I'm very social work oriented, mental health oriented.
Right.
The water cooler conversations for us are over. They just don't exist anymore.
Well, I mean, you're still going to have folks who want that,
yes.
Okay? And I mean, like we have an office, and people still want the personal touch. People are welcome. All I'm trying to say is, a lot of there's a room for that extra work environment that's done online.
In the old days, 2 years ago, if I see more than 2 people doing something, I go back to work with a smile on my face. Now when they're together, I'm happy for them. It's just like, thank goodness they're having a conversation.
Right.
There's a certain support system with that. I try to go to lunch with everybody off and on, during the week, and we know that we want that. We want that human touch.
Absolutely.
And one time I go to the doc, I wasn't feeling good. He says to me, he puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, "So what's going on?" Instantly I felt better. Right. Instantly. Because we want that as human beings, right?
Well, I mean, there's certain industries, specifically medicine, in which you can have a Zoom meeting with a doctor, but you still want to be, there's got to be a personal contact because you're talking about something very private. It's your personal health. With the same thing with attorneys, because you want someone to have a personal contact. You tell somebody your life problems or whatever. You want to do it not through a screen. You want to do it in person. So those first client meetings, but the tangential stuff, they're having to meet with third parties, they're meeting with counsel, without all that stuff can happen online and without losing money.
And we see how much faster those meetings. I was meeting there 3 professionals. I thought I was going to have to go downtown, so I'm thinking 45 minutes for me to get lost in Park or Uber, and then wait 10 minutes at the office, wait for the people to get together. No. I said, I'll check in at 12:45. No, 1 o'clock is the time. Check in at 1. Okay. Right. 1 o'clock there it was. 1:30, it was over.
It was over. I mean, and even a lot of times when we were in the courthouse, we would spend an entire day just wasting time waiting.
Yes.
Okay. Now you're waiting, but you're waiting at your desk while you can do other work. So
we're going to get all used to that. And I think that most of us are getting used to that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so, again, we got 2 minutes left. And I want to, again, welcome to the new year, which is coming around the corner. We turn around and it's 2 years later, and we survived. And I'm glad your family is good.
Yeah, thank you very much.
My
Michael.
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Javier Baños, CPA, attorney, and he can help you out there. Want to thank.
Thank you very much.
We want to thank Junior and Michael for producing the show. Folks, have a great day and be safe out there.
Thank you.